The morning of October 3rd, 2010. The southwest face of Cho Oyu, the sixth highest mountain on the planet, on the border between Nepal and Tibet. At about 7,000 meters, a lone man is taking down his tent to move it higher. His name is Walter Nones. He is 38. In a month, he was supposed to turn 39. 6,300 meters below, two of his teammates remain. Above him stands the untouched face he came here for. He will not come back, neither up nor down. A few hours later, his wife Manuela will receive a short message, and within a day, it will spread across all of South Tyrol, and from there into Italian, German, Pakistani, and Nepalese newspapers, word for word. This morning, Walter had an accident. We will never be able to hold him again. What exactly happened up there at 7,000 meters? An avalanche, a fall, a gust of wind, a tent torn into the abyss. No one will ever say for certain. There were no witnesses. This is the story of a man who once already walked out alive from a mountain that takes one out of every four, and who did not walk out from a second one, considered the safest of the 8,000ers. Walter Nones was born on November 5, 1971, in Cavallese, a small town in the province of Trento. That year was unusually snowy in the Dolomites, and in family conversations it always came up as an omen. He spent his childhood in the village of Sover in the Sembra Valley. There, the slopes of the Dolomites begin practically at the doorstep. This is not the postcard scenery of resort brochures. Sover lives off forest, vineyards, hunting, hard country work. Children there know from a very early age what altitude is, what an icy stream is, what a steep climb feels like. Walter started climbing at 14, first on local training crags, then on routes in the Dolomites. Friends from those years remember him. Calm, stubborn, never showing off, capable of working silently for hours on a single hard pitch. By the end of his teens, he was already climbing routes graded 6 to 7 on the UIAA scale. By 24 came his first serious Himalayan ascent, a new rock route on La Bouche East Peak in Nepal, 6,119 meters, grade 7. That was 1995. From that moment on, Walter was no longer an amateur. He moved to Selva di Valgardena, into the very heart of the Dolomites, and joined the Carabinieri. In Italy, climbers have their own path into state structures, the Alpine Rescue Service and the mountain units of the Carabinieri. It is not just a job, it is a lifelong tie to the mountain. A few years later, he became a mountain guide and an instructor at the Carabinieri Alpine Center, the school that trains Italian military climbers, rescuers, dog handlers. They teach you there not how to storm summits, but how to come back alive and bring others back alive. Nones was a man at home in that school. Around the same time, he married Manuela, also from South Tyrol, and settled into a house in Selva. They had 2 sons. Family life moved between the Dolomites and the far-off mountains of Asia. At home, he was a rare guest, but friends of the family say Walter always brought back from his expeditions not souvenirs, but stories. And those stories around the kitchen table would last for hours. Nones consciously chose a particular kind of climbing. He refused supplemental oxygen. He did not go on commercial expeditions. He did not like fixed ropes on the key pitches. At high altitude, he avoided high-altitude porters. He was drawn to places where, as he himself put it, the doors are still open for exploration. New routes, untouched faces, a small team, alpine style. It was both philosophy and calculation. A big team with oxygen and support camps turns a mountain into a route with answer keys. Alpine style gives the mountain back its true scale. You carry everything yourself. You make the call yourself. You answer for it yourself. His wife Manuela would later recall the words he repeated in conversations and in his journals. When I imagine my own death, I see it in the mountains, and I feel peace, not fear, because climbing is a choice of the heart. And to die that way means to live that way. Many people would later quote those words as prophecy. Walter himself did not see them as a grand statement. For him, they were a way to explain why he lived this way, and not another. The first big step in his career came in the summer of 2004. An Italian team set out for K2, the second highest mountain in the world, on the classic Abruzzi route. The team included Karl Unterkircher, Silvio Mondinelli, Ugo Giacomelli, Michele Compagnoni, and Walter Nones. They climbed without oxygen. That is no small decision. K2, without oxygen in early 2004, meant a route on the edge of human tolerance, through the death zone, over ice and rock, with winds that on the ridge become a wall of sound. On the summit, Nones became an 8,000er climber for the first time. But that expedition is remembered not for the summit push, but for what came afterwards. On the descent, they ran into a group of Spanish climbers in serious trouble. Among them was Edurne Pasaban, the future first woman to summit all 14 8,000ers. Two of the Spaniards could barely walk. Mondinelli and Nones, exhausted from their own ascent, turned around and helped strangers down to camp. They escorted them through the key pitches, set up belay points, shared their water. Without that help, the Spaniards almost certainly would not have come back, a gesture that says a great deal about Nones as a man. He never liked that story being written about. In one of the rare interviews on the subject, he answered briefly, "It is normal. I would want someone to do the same for me." If anyone began praising him for helping the Sherpas, for donating to Pakistani villages after floods, for his quiet involvement in rescue operations, he, according to those close to him, would genuinely get angry. Real help, he believed, does not need thanks and certainly should not end up in the newspapers. He sent money to Nepal and Pakistan without telling even his friends. They would find out by accident, through local guides who spoke his name the way you speak the name of a relative. After K2, Nones turned more and more often away from the well-trodden paths and went where there were no routes yet. In 2006, together with Karl Unterkircher, he made the first ascent of the north face of Mount Genyan in Sichuan in western China. 6,240 meters, pure alpine style, no fixed ropes, no support camps. It is not the kind of summit that brings out the journalists. But within the narrow circle of professionals, ascents like that are valued more than another commercial 8,000er. A small team, a new line, minimum gear. That was the style Nones chose again and again. In those same years, he opened new rock routes in the Dolomites up to grade 8 on the UIAA scale, taught cadets, worked in the Alpine Rescue Service. Karl Unterkircher was the most famous high-altitude South Tyrolean of his generation, the author of the first ascent of Everest and K2 without oxygen in a single expedition. By 2006, he and Walter were no longer just rope partners. They were close friends. Their wives were friends as families. Their sons were growing up in the same village. From this friendship would grow the next, the loudest, and the most tragic chapter of his life. Spring of 2008. 3 South Tyroleans, Karl Unterkircher, Simon Kehrer, and Walter Nones, fly to Pakistan. The objective is Nanga Parbat, 8,125 meters, the 9th highest mountain in the world. A mountain with its own nickname, the Naked One. On its slopes, the 20th century left dozens of climbers, more than on any other 8,000er except K2. But the trio is not going for the classic. They want to climb the Rakhiot, the North Face. It was on this very line that the famous 1934 German expedition of Willy Merkel tried to climb, only to be broken by storm and cold. It was on the same face that in 1953 the Austrian Hermann Buhl made the first ascent of Nanga Parbat alone, without oxygen, in a style that at the time looked like madness. Since then, almost no one has climbed the Rakhiot in alpine style. The face is considered one of the most difficult and most avalanche-prone on the mountain. On certain sections, the angle approaches 60 degrees, and giant seracs hang above it, ice balconies that can collapse without warning. Karl Unterkircher is the leader. By this point, he has already summited Everest and K2 without oxygen. Simon Kehrer is the youngest in the team, hardy, calm, with experience in the Alpine Rescue Service. Walter Nones is the second experienced high-altitude climber. He takes on the technical work and the route assessment. They go in pure alpine style, no Sherpas, no oxygen, no fixed ropes on the wall. Everything they will need, they carry themselves. For evacuation, they drag light skis along, the idea being that with luck, after the summit, they can descend on the opposite side of the mountain by the classic Buhl route and ski part of the way down. An unusual decision, but in their logic, it gains them speed. They reach base camp at the end of May. Several weeks go to acclimatization. They climb to intermediate altitudes, set up caches, study the behavior of the face. The Rakhiot lives its own life. They watch ice falls peel off the seracs. At night, they hear the rumble of avalanches. They see how the snow bridges over the crevasses change shape. Any mistake in reading the glacier costs dearly here. On July 14th, at 10 in the evening, the trio sets off on the summit push. The night start is chosen on purpose. In the cold, the avalanche risk is lower. They work through the night. At 4,500, they leave a cache. Beyond that, ice at 60 degrees, a vertical mixed pitch, a zone of crevasses. Nones and Kehrer talk through every move on the go. Karl moves in his usual style, focused, silent, sparing of words. The morning of July 15th finds them at about 6,300 meters. They are already worn out, but they keep going. Around 9 in the morning, at about 6,800 meters, the thing happens that will break the expedition. Karl is in the lead. Suddenly a snow bridge over a crevasse gives way under him. He falls. By various reconstructions, the fall is between 20 and 40 meters. Nones and Kehrer rush to the edge. They shout down, shine a headlamp into the dark, lower a rope, try to make contact. For a long time, there is no answer. Then, at some point, a faint reply comes up from below. They lower a rope with a harness, shout for him to clip in. Karl evidently is seriously injured. He cannot pull himself up, and he cannot climb out on his own. They work over the crevasse all night. By the morning of July 16th, it becomes clear. Getting him out is impossible. The snow and ice that fell with him have buried the bottom of the crevasse. No more sounds come up. Karl Unterkircher remains on the Rakiote forever. At that moment, Walter and Simon find themselves in a situation that has no good answer. To go back down the face they have just climbed is impossible. Below it lies a zone of fractures and serac collapses, and a descent down vertical ice without a belaying partner on the key pitches is almost out of reach. The Rakiote will not let them back down. There is only one way left, up. Across the summit ridge, by the classic bull route, down the opposite side of the mountain. That means climbing about another 1,500 meters up an unknown wall through the death zone without a guide, with a depleted team broken by grief. They have 2 tents, a gas stove, a minimum of food, and very little water. And 9 days ahead. On July 17th, the storm hits. Snow piles up to the waist. Visibility drops to a few meters. Every step upward costs hours. Nones and Kehrer move as a rope team, taking turns breaking trail, taking turns resting. At 6,650, they pitch the first emergency bivouac. At 6,800, the second. At 7,000, the third. At 7,300, the fourth. Most of the time they spend in a single tent, saving gas and strength. According to Simon Kehrer's recollections, one of the bivouacs was set up on a narrow snow ridge. The tent partly hung over an abyss they estimated at about 2,500 meters deep. To extend the platform, they slid skis under the floor. At night, every turn of the body sent a nervous tremor through the tent wall. From time to time, they hear an avalanche running down the slope below. The sound reaches the bivouac with a delay, as though the mountain were warning them of the next discharge. Every such warning is one more reason to stay inside the tent and not move until the wind drops. The decision to climb to the summit ridge and descend the opposite face does not come at once. The first 2 days after Karl's death, Nones and Kehrer talk it through with each other and with base camp about going back down. They already know parts of the Rakiote face. They have just climbed it. But above it hangs the ice balcony, the giant serac, and a second pass beneath it is a roll of the dice. Over the radio, base camp advises them not to go back. The same signals come from Italy. The final choice is made by the 2 men on the wall. They decide to climb up to 7,500 to reach the ridge along which Hermann Buhl descended in 1953. The line is known, it is documented, it is not the shortest, but it is the only one that gives them a chance. Each of these calculations is made at an altitude where the head works slowly, and one mistake drags the next one along behind it. The temperature inside the tent stays around -8. Outside it is -20 and lower. At such altitudes the body stops recovering. Above 7,000 you no longer rest, Kehrer would later say. The body does not regenerate. Sleep turns into a half doze. Every morning they step out onto the wall, knowing their reserves have dropped another 10%. The food ration is barely there. For 2 of them per day, a couple of muesli bars and a handful of nuts. For water, one stove, and one gas canister. To get a single liter of water, you have to melt snow for about an hour. They drink at most 2 liters a day each. The norm at that altitude is 6. Every step is taken in steady dehydration. The head works more slowly, decisions come with delay. Any small error, a harness left unclipped, a knot tied wrong, a step missing the hold, becomes critical. Back in Italy, a second story is unfolding in parallel. A rescue story. Karl's wife, Walter's wife, and Simon's wife learn what is happening from fragmentary reports. The fact that Karl is dead is in the media almost immediately. Whether the other two are alive, for the first day, no one is sure. Silvio Mondinelli flies out from Bergamo, the same man who was on K2 with Nones. He makes it to Pakistan, to the expedition's base camp, and from there coordinates everything that can be coordinated. The Pakistani army provides helicopters, but at that altitude the machines are nearly useless. Above 7,000 they cannot land, above 6,500 the rotor is at its limit. Radio contact with Walter and Simon comes in fragments, through long gaps. From base camp they are told altitudes, landmarks, weather forecasts. For July 21st, the forecasters promise a narrow weather window. It is the last chance. On July 22nd and 23rd, Nones and Kehrer begin the descent down the Boule route. Visibility is almost gone. On 2 sections, avalanches sweep over them, both small, passing along the edge. They survive by sheer luck. At 7,500, they switch to the skis they have dragged through the entire expedition. On skis, they can leave the danger zone faster and read the terrain more easily. Simon would later recount that they navigated by enlarged photographs of the slope. They had no GPS, no proper map for a ski mountaineering descent off an 8,000er. 1 minute the sun was shining, he would say, and 5 minutes later you cannot see your own hand. At 5,800, a Pakistani military helicopter picks them up. 9 days on the wall, 9 days short a partner, 9 days in which every step could have been the last. They came down alive. And it was at that moment that the name Walter Nones became known for the first time outside the narrow circle of climbers. Coming home to Italy turns out to be hard. They are met as heroes. Newspapers run their survival story on the same page as coverage of the Beijing Olympics. Reinhold Messner, the legend of South Tyrolean climbing, calls the story of Nones and Kehrer one of the most difficult self-rescues in the history of the Himalayas. In Selva di Val Gardena, Karl Unterkircher is buried symbolically. The body remains in the crevasse, at a depth out of reach for any recovery. Hundreds of people come to the funeral, but behind the public admiration comes another, heavier wave. In the climbing community, the questions begin. Could Karl have been saved? Did they read the snow bridge correctly? Did they push out too soon on July 14th? Some of the criticism comes out in public, some stays in the back rooms. The hardest conversations are about money. A few weeks after the return, the families received the bill for the work of the Pakistani helicopters, 33,500 euros. The sum lands on people who have just lost a close friend. In Italy and Germany, a brief public campaign is launched, and part of the sum is collected by newspaper readers. Simon Kehrer would later write that he coped psychologically because he had not seen all of it up close. "I have never felt the danger right next to me," he says in an interview with a German publication. "I sleep normally. During the day I work." He refuses a psychologist. A climber is a stubborn head. But he also admits, every time he meets Karl's parents and wife, everything comes back up from inside again. Walter takes Karl's loss harder. Everyone close to him sees it. Manuela would later say, "It was hard for Walter to accept Karl's loss, and the polemic that followed did not help." Friends notice that he becomes quieter. He spends a lot of time in the mountains close to home. He talks little about Pakistan. In 2010, together with Simon Kehrer, he writes a book called Teufelswand, published by a German Tyrolean publishing house. It is their only extended attempt to explain what happened on the Rakiot. The book is full of technical detail and short on emotion. That is the style of the authors themselves. Nones keeps climbing. In that same 2008, before Nanga Parbat, he made the first ascent of the west ridge of Changra Peak North in Pakistan, 6,840 meters, also in alpine style, with a small team. After Nanga Parbat, he does not leave the big mountains, but he changes the rhythm. He guides in the Dolomites. He teaches at the Carabinieri School. He works in the Alpine Rescue Service and pulls people out of avalanches around Selva. He keeps traveling to Nepal and Pakistan, helping local people quietly, without cameras or press releases. Those who knew him well say that after Nanga Parbat, he looked at the mountains differently, without the lost innocence of his early years, but also without bitterness, with an understanding of the price. Sometimes he repeated to his cadets a phrase that would later be remembered at his funeral. The mountain is always smarter than you. The only way to come to terms with it is to listen. In the autumn of 2010, Nones is heading for the Himalayas again. The objective is Cho Oyu, an 8,000er on the Nepal-Tibet border, 8,188 meters. Not for the summit. That year, hundreds of commercial clients are heading up the classic Tibetan side by the normal route, and to Nones that has long been uninteresting. He is going for the southern Nepalese side of the mountain for the southwest face. He wants to put up a new line. In climbing circles, Cho Oyu is considered one of the easiest 8,000ers by the normal route and one of the least explored from the south. The southwest face is long, avalanche-prone, with few comfortable spots for camps. There are almost no helpers there, no fixed ropes, no other tracks, no previous footprints. That is exactly what Nones is looking for. With him are two partners, Giovanni Macaluso and Manuel Knocker, both South Tyroleans, both of whom have climbed with him before. They leave Italy on September 6th. The return is planned for October 20th. They set up base camp at the foot of the wall. For several days they work as a rope team, checking the slope, climbing to 5,500, then to 6,300. They study the line. They take video. They photograph sections. Cho Oyu is behaving nervously these days. On the other side of the mountain, on the classic Tibetan route, in early October, 2 avalanches occur. Camp 3 on the normal route is buried twice under a mass of snow. Other teams report this over the radio. On the southwest side, the picture is similar. There is a lot of snow, the slope is loaded. Nones and his partners see this and understand. The window for an attempt is very narrow. They make a decision. Macaluso and Knocker stay at 6,300 to continue acclimatizing, while Nones goes up alone to get a better look at the wall and to set up a higher camp, from which the 3 of them will then move together. This is a typical pattern for him. Do the hard part himself, so as not to put his partners at risk. According to his own blog, kept by his wife, he is feeling strong. He is planning to push solo to 7,000 and photograph the key section beyond. On the morning of October 3rd, he sets off upward. By his own estimate, he needs about 5 or 6 hours to reach 7,000. He takes the minimum: tent, sleeping bag, stove, gas canister, radio, camera, harness, skis, crampons, ice axe. Communication is on a schedule. Every 2 hours, a brief check-in on the radio with the partners below. At about 7,000, he begins setting up the camp. At some point, contact with him breaks off. Macaluso and Knocker wait for the agreed time, then again, then once more. The silence drags on. By evening, they begin climbing to the same altitude, following his tracks. And they find the traces of what happened. What exactly took place, no one will ever say. By one version, an avalanche came down on him. There was too much snow on the slope at that time. The wall had been behaving too nervously over the last 24 hours. By another version, which several German publications insist on, at the moment of assembling or pitching the tent, a gust of wind tore it loose, and the drag along the icy slope pulled the climber into the abyss. Italian sources more often speak of an avalanche. The Swiss Neue Zürcher Zeitung in its headline puts it briefly: "A mountain that once spared him this time betrayed him." They all agree on one thing: he was alone. There was no witness. On Walter's website, run by his wife, a short note will appear. He felt strong and decided to set up the camp at 7,700 meters above his team in order to photograph the next section of the route. That small solo push is a routine procedure for him, repeated dozens of times in the Dolomites and the Karakoram. This time, it turns out to be his last. His wife Manuela sends a short message through her husband's website. The text will spread to climbing publications all over the world, from Italy's La Repubblica to Pakistani and Nepalese media. She asks the press for restraint. There are no precise details about what happened. We ask the media to be respectful in publishing this news. It is very much in Walter's spirit. No sensation, no hero pose. Just a fact. The mountains have taken another. A second note appears on the website, one that would later end many of the obituaries. When I imagine my own death, I see it in the mountains, and I feel peace, not fear. Walter once wrote that line in his own diary. Now it is being reprinted in Trento, in Bolzano, in Zurich, and in Berlin. The reaction in South Tyrol is fast and heavy. The Carabinieri of the Alpine Center in Selva di Val Gardena lower the flag. Local mountain societies dedicate evenings to his memory. The newspapers Dolomiten and Stuttgarter Nachrichten run long pieces remembering K2, the Rakiot, his help to strangers in the mountains. The Swiss Neue Zürcher Zeitung publishes a brief but precise obituary under a headline about a mountain that spared him, then betrayed him. Reinhold Messner, also a South Tyrolean, writes a short text. For the region, this is the second great loss in 2 years, after Karl Unterkircher. The house in Selva where the family lives is covered in flowers. A few weeks later, Nones' body is brought down and returned home. The funeral is held in Selva di Val Gardena. Hundreds of people gather: guides, rescuers, climbers, students, friends from Pakistan and Nepal. The coffin is carried by Carabinieri from the Alpine Center. After the service, a small group walks up the slope above the village and leaves behind a rope and carabiners, the old climber's ritual of farewell to one who has stayed in the mountains. After the funeral, there remains a long list of what will no longer be. There will be no next expedition, in which Nones plan to come back to the idea of new lines on the 7,000ers of the Karakoram. There will be no more lessons with the Carabinieri cadets, where he liked to repeat that the mountain is always smarter than you. There will be no more quiet help to villages after the next flood. There will be no more long conversations at the kitchen table with Manuela, who now alone keeps running his website and looking after his notebooks. What remain are photographs, the book Teufelswand, the routes on Genyan and Chongra, his name on the list of Italians who climbed K2 without oxygen. What remain are the memories of 9 days in which he led Simon Kehrer down off the Rakiot face. What remain, too, are the official Italian records. Posthumously, Nones is mentioned in several Carabinieri service rosters as one of the instructor's entire generations of cadets looked up to. In Selva di Val Gardena, in the local cultural center, a small permanent exhibition will open a few years later. Photographs from expeditions, an ice axe, a harness, diary entries. Children from local schools will be brought there. They will be told that the man who lived in this village helped strangers down, off K2, spent 9 days bringing a partner off the wall of Nanga Parbat, and one morning did not come back from Cho Oyu. Most of the children will not have heard those names before they came to the museum. After they leave, they will remember. In the climbing community, after Nones' death, the old conversation comes back, the same one that began after Nanga Parbat and never ended. Can routes like that be climbed at all? Is such a risk justified for a single line on a face? Each person has their own answer. Nones himself answered that question with his whole life. He went where there was no path yet, and he did it the way he believed was right, without oxygen, without putting weight on others, with the calm of a man who understands the price. There is a heavy arithmetic to that choice. Over 15 years of a serious career, he lost several close friends in the mountains, including Karl Unterkircher, and not once did he say in public that he was prepared to change his style. Karl Unterkircher went first into the crevasse on the Rakiot in 2008. Walter Nones went second, alone, on the southwest face of Cho Oyu in 2010. Between those two deaths lie 2 years, thousands of kilometers, and one shared friendship that began long before they saw their last mountains. On 2 different walls, on 2 different 8,000ers, in 2 different styles. Both went out the way they had chosen to live. For Karl, it was the crevasse. For Walter, it was a gust of wind or an avalanche. No one knows for sure. Their wives now live in the same village. Their children grow up together. Their names are on the same memorial plaques at the Carabinieri Alpine Center. From that Nanga Parbat expedition, only Simon Kehrer came back alive. Years later, he would say in an interview with a German podcast a simple line: "Ice does not talk. It does not warn. It does not explain. It just is." And to walk on it means each time choosing again whether you are ready for the silence of the glacier. Walter Nones chose that silence many times. 9 days above the Rakiot, 2 years of breath in between, and one last day alone at 7,000 on the southwest face of Cho Oyu. There were no witnesses. What is left are tracks, a camera, skis, a harness, and a short message from his wife that flew around the world in a single day. And there is also the silence of the mountain, which spared him once and the second time did not let him go. In the climbing calendar of 2010, the name Walter Nones stands among other high-altitude climbers who the same season did not come back from the Himalayas. Each of those names is a separate story, a separate mountain, a separate mistake, or simply bad luck. Nones' name in that line stands out for one thing only. 2 years earlier, he had already been the man who should not have come back. Then he did. The second time, the mountain decided otherwise.